As I went down in the river to pray, studying about that good old way, and who shall wear the starry crown? Good Lord, show me the way. Oh, sisters, let's go down, come on down. Oh, sisters, let's go down in the river to pray. As I went down in the river to pray, studying about that good old way, and who shall wear the robe and crown? Good Lord, show me the way. Oh, brothers, let's go down, come on down. Come on, brothers, let's go down in the river to pray. As I went down in the river to pray, studying about that good old way, and who shall wear the star and crown? Good Lord, show me the way. Oh, fathers, let's go down, come on down. Oh, fathers, let's go down in the river to pray. As I went down in the river to pray, studying about that good old way, and who shall wear the robe and crown? Good Lord, show me the way. Oh, mothers, let's go down, come on down, don't you wanna go down? Come on, mothers, let's go down in the river to pray. As I went down in the river to pray, studying about that good old way, and who shall wear the star and crown? Good Lord, show me the way. Oh, sinners, let's go down, come on down. Oh, sinners, let's go down in the river to pray. As I went down in the river to pray, studying about that good old way, and who shall wear the robe and crown? Good Lord, show me the way.
You feel that there is something different in the air, a shift that doesn't come from the external world, but from within you. It's as if a new vibration is silently calling you to leave repetition behind and enter a new era. And this call, though subtle, is clear to those with spiritual ears. The chosen ones are awakening. The fifth dimension is not a physical destination. It is a rise in consciousness. It's when your soul begins to reject everything that is superficial and seeks what is true, pure, light. You begin to notice that you can no longer fit into empty places or maintain soulless conversations. This is not confusion. It is alignment with who you truly are. Many still live as if nothing is happening, but the chosen, they feel it. They feel that the cycle has changed. They feel that time has accelerated. They feel that the moment has come to leave behind what no longer vibrates with the new frequency. And even if they don't fully understand it rationally, they know deep inside that they are being called to something greater, something eternal. This crossing is personal, silent, and inevitable. It doesn't depend on others' approval, nor on grand signs. The portal has already begun to open within you, and those who are attentive, those who have been prepared in secret, are ready to depart. because the new era has already begun, and the chosen were molded to recognize it, even without words, even without applause. If you feel that this message is for you, then know this: you are not alone. I am George, and I'm here to walk with you on this journey. Follow the channel to keep receiving these messages that strengthen your faith and remind you of your purpose. The journey is just beginning. Welcome to the new earth. The time of crossing has come, awakening to a greater calling. You feel that something has changed, even though no one has said anything. The world keeps turning. People remain busy with their tasks, but inside you, something is no longer the same. It's as if a cycle is closing, and at the same time, a new reality is beginning to reveal itself. Subtle, silent, yet unmistakable. If you are feeling this, perhaps it's because the time of crossing has arrived. And this crossing is not physical, it is spiritual. We are living in a time where the veil between the visible and the invisible is becoming thinner. The fifth dimension is not a place, it is a state of consciousness. It's like seeing with new eyes, feeling with new depth, living with a new purpose. And not everyone is ready for this. But the chosen are being called. Maybe you've been feeling more tired, more introspective, more selective. Maybe environments that once made you feel good now leave you drained. Conversations that once seemed normal now sound empty. Relationships that were once important no longer make sense. It's not coldness. It's a sign that your spirit is aligning with something new, with something that is already vibrating beyond what the ordinary world can offer. This is the beginning of the journey toward the fifth dimension, when the heart realizes it can no longer live halfway. Now, the calling intensifies. The new earth, this new state of existence that is more conscious, lighter, more connected to God, is not a place you reach by running. It's something you access when you are willing to leave behind everything that can no longer walk with you. But this portal is invisible. It does not open for those who run without direction. It reveals itself to those who walk with awareness. It recognizes those who have undergone inner transformation, those who obeyed even when they were alone, those who said yes, even without knowing all the details. It is for them that the new begins to appear. The crossing doesn't require perfection, but it does require surrender. You don't need to understand everything. You don't need to be flawless, but you do need to be willing to let go of what no longer vibrates with your truth. Because you can't live a new time with the structures of the old time. 2026 will not be just another year on the calendar. For the awakened, it will be the point at which life begins to be led by purpose, not obligation. By alignment, not habit.
Oh my God.
By real faith, not spiritual appearance. And those who feel this will know. The portal has already begun to open. But pay attention. This opening is internal. It is silent. It does not come with euphoria, but with clarity. The chosen will know it is time to let go of the old, not
These
with
are pretty
resentment,
good.
but with gratitude. Because everything that has passed, even the difficult things, served to shape who you are now. But now, it is time to move on. And you? Are you feeling this calling? Are you sensing that you can no longer stay where you are? Are you hearing deep in your soul that the time to cross has come? If so, you are not alone.
Come on.
Other chosen ones are awakening too. And together, even from afar, we form an invisible network of light, faith, and truth. In the next part, we'll talk about what needs to be left behind before crossing the portal. Because yes, there is a necessary farewell, and it's not easy, but it is liberating. The baggage that can't cross, the farewell that precedes the new. The crossing into the fifth dimension does not begin when something new appears. It begins when you realize that certain things can no longer continue. This is one of the most delicate moments in the Chosen One's journey, the time of farewell. And it's not just about leaving behind people or places, but releasing everything that no longer has life within you. There are habits, thoughts, beliefs, emotional patterns, and even old dreams that have already served their purpose. And to keep insisting on them now would be like carrying a suitcase full of stones into a place where only the essential can enter. The fifth dimension vibrates with lightness, truth, coherence. There is no longer room for what drains, what pretends, what blocks. And that's why the calling becomes so clear. It's time to let go. Letting go may feel like loss, but for those who are awakened, letting go is respect. It's saying, I honor what was, but it no longer fits where I'm going. And that applies to relationships that no longer walk at the same frequency. It applies to cycles that repeat without meaning. It applies to old versions of yourself, which were useful in times of survival, but now limit your expansion. The portal to the new earth does not open with force. It opens with lightness. And lightness is not the absence of pain. It is the choice not to cling to what no longer feeds your soul. Maybe you're at this point now. Maybe you're feeling the weight of all that you're still trying to carry. Maybe you feel you're running out of strength to maintain structures that no longer hold. This is not weakness. This is a sign that the time of crossing has come. The problem is that many want to cross the portal carrying baggage that God has already asked them to release. And then, the portal seems like it's not opening, but it's there. What needs to happen is for you to be ready to let go of what is blocking your movement. The transition to the fifth dimension is first and foremost an emptying. You'll begin to notice that your life starts to align differently. What used to be urgent no longer is. What used to be necessary loses its importance. What you used to tolerate now deeply bothers you. These signs are the voice of the Spirit saying, it's time to go. In the next part, we'll talk about the inner signs of the crossing. How to recognize that you're no longer in the same place as before, even if everything around you looks the same. Inner signs of the crossing. When the world is still the same, but you no longer are. One of the most challenging moments of spiritual awakening is when nothing on the outside has changed. But inside, everything is different. You're still in the same places, with the same people, perhaps even with the same commitments. But something within you has already crossed over. This is the first clear sign that you are in the crossing. It's as if the old world has lost its color. Conversations no longer hold your attention. Habits no longer make sense. Environments that once energized you now leave you tired. And you find yourself asking, what is happening to me? What's happening is simple and profound. You are awakening to a new frequency. The transition to the fifth dimension does not begin with a change of scenery. It begins with a change in perception. What once felt normal now feels superficial. What once brought pleasure now feels empty. What once made sense now feels heavy. And this doesn't mean something is wrong with you. It means something is right. In this time, you may even seem distant. But inside, you are closer to yourself than ever before. That's why many chosen ones enter a silent phase. It's as if they've stepped off stage for a while, not because they gave up on life, but because they are returning to it from a different place, more truthful, more mature, more free. Another sign of this crossing is sensitivity. You begin to notice more clearly what you once tolerated. The energy of people, the intention behind words, the vibration of each environment. It all becomes obvious. And with this perception comes the question, is it worth staying here? In the fifth dimension, consciousness invites you to respect your limits, to no longer sacrifice your peace just to please, to no longer remain where your spirit no longer resides. And that doesn't make you better than anyone. It makes you more faithful to who you really are. You begin to realize that being at peace is worth more than being included, that being whole is worth more than being accepted, that walking alone for a while is better than walking disconnected from yourself. These are the signs. And if you're living this, know this. You've already started to cross. Even if you're still in the same places, you're already in a different vibration. And it's this vibration that soon will change everything around you. The silent letting go, when the heart learns to release without guilt. The crossing to the new earth does not happen with grand events. It unfolds in small daily decisions, in choices only the heart perceives, in detachments no one else sees. And one of the greatest signs that you're crossing is when letting go becomes natural. At the beginning of the spiritual journey, everything feels like a battle. Internal battles, external conflicts, efforts to hold up what God has already asked you to release. But there comes a moment when the chosen one no longer fights to hold on to what is falling. They simply let go, not out of coldness, but out of discernment. The matured heart understands. Not everything that was good can continue. Not everything that was necessary needs to remain. The answer is, you are not losing yourself. You are aligning. Letting go of what once made sense is recognizing that you have evolved, and that now other paths will open. This is one of the greatest lessons of the fifth dimension. You don't need to carry everything in order to keep walking. In fact, the lighter you are, the clearer the path becomes. Emotional baggage, forced relationships, empty commitments, all of it drains your energy. And to cross the portal, you need clean energy, aligned energy. That's why the process of spiritual transition involves so many losses. But they're not true losses. They're liberations disguised as farewells. It's in this place that the chosen one learns to distinguish presence from attachment, to love without clinging, to walk with others without depending on them, to serve without self-erasure. This emotional maturity is one of the greatest signs that you are ready for the new time. And with time, you realize life is not punishing you, it's preparing you. God is not taking things away to weaken you. He's making space for what truly nourishes you. Silence becomes an ally. You speak less, listen more, react less, feel more, decide calmly, walk with awareness, and what once hurt you now simply teaches you. This is true detachment. It's not becoming cold, but choosing peace. And if today you feel that you are in the midst of this process, letting go, stepping away, saying goodbye, know that you are not regressing. You are maturing. And the fifth dimension begins exactly there, when you let go of the noise to live with more truth. The silent crossing, when the new begins within. Most people believe that important changes arrive with noise, movement, and grand revelations. But the chosen know the greatest transition happens in silence, without announcement, without audience, without warning. The crossing to the new earth will not be marked by a date on the calendar, nor by a visible event. It begins within. It begins when the heart realizes it no longer fits where it once felt comfortable. It feels strange at first. You find yourself in familiar places, with beloved people, doing what you've always done. But something feels off. A light, yet constant discomfort. And then you understand. The place hasn't changed. You have. The portal to the new earth doesn't require physical effort. It requires spiritual maturity. You don't cross it in a hurry. The crossing happens when you stop fighting to become who you once were. When you stop insisting on maintaining what no longer makes sense. When you allow yourself to step off the stage without resentment. It's an internal decision. I will no longer deny what my spirit has already understood. You realize you can no longer fake interest. You can no longer smile out of politeness when something hurts you. You can no longer stay where your soul is begging you to leave. And that hurts, because saying no to what's comfortable takes courage. But that pain is also a sign. It means you're moving forward, that you're saying yes to who you truly are. The crossing is not made of beautiful words. It is made of daily choices, choosing not to react, choosing not to justify yourself, choosing silence, choosing to leave in peace, even without explanation. You begin to understand that the new earth is not a place. It is a state of lightness, a state of truth, a state of connection to what really matters. And in that place, you no longer need to carry unnecessary weight, nor prove anything to anyone, nor force yourself to fit, nor fight against the flow. The chosen one doesn't cross the portal to be accepted. They cross because they've already been transformed. They understand that continuing to try to fit where God has already taken them from is disrespectful to their own process. And even if no one notices your change, you feel it. Anxiety no longer controls you as before. Fear has lost its power. The need for acceptance has become a distant echo. You know something new has begun. The new posture, living aligned, even in the midst of chaos. After the silent crossing, the chosen enter a new time. Not a perfect time without challenges, but a time where everything makes more sense. A time where peace no longer depends on external circumstances, but on internal coherence. The great change doesn't happen outside. The new earth begins when the chosen one changes the way they position themselves in life. They no longer react as before. They no longer respond to pleas. They no longer insist on relationships that drain their energy. They have understood. It is no longer possible to lose themselves just to maintain others' comfort. The chosen now live aligned with the Spirit. They feel when something is out of tune, and more than just feeling it, they respect it. They no longer justify what hurts them. They walk away with love. They fall silent with wisdom. They remain with firmness. The new posture is lighter, but also firmer. It is light because it no longer seeks to please. It is firm because it doesn't negotiate what is true. And so, the path becomes clearer. Even if the world around remains noisy, the chosen one lives with sobriety. And what leave is honored in its leaving. The new earth requires this new posture, to live with lightness, but with awareness, to speak little, but with truth, to do less, but with intention, to be present, but whole. And the more the chosen position themselves this way, the more they feel God's support. They understand they don't need to control everything, nor foresee every step. They just need to obey the inner direction, the one that doesn't make noise, but never deceives. This silent obedience bears fruit. The chosen begin to realize that their energy impacts environments, that their posture transforms more than their words, that their life is now their greatest testimony. Spirituality stops being performance. It becomes coherence. And here is an important truth. In the new earth, living in truth matters more than being admired. You no longer need to prove that you are spiritual. You only need to live in peace with what God is asking of you. Even if no one understands, even if it looks like madness to the world, the chosen one knows. The portal has opened, they have crossed, and now they can no longer go back to what once was. The closure, the silence that confirms the crossing. We have reached the end of this path, but for the chosen ones, This end is only the beginning of a new way of existing. When the portal opens, there is no celebration. There is no public announcement. There are no spiritual fireworks. There is a steady silence that confirms what only the spirit can comprehend. You have crossed. This silence is different from loneliness. It is peace. It is confirmation. It is the clear sign that the time of running is over. Now is the time to walk with direction. After the crossing, the chosen no longer need to explain. They don't justify their change. They don't try to convince anyone, because they've understood something precious. Truth needs no defense. It stands on its own. In this new time, the chosen one lives with fewer words and more presence. They understand that every choice, every response, and even every silence carries spiritual weight. They do not speak on impulse. They do not react out of neediness. They no longer insist on remaining where there is no longer alignment. The new earth requires this sobriety. It is not a place of escape. It is a place of consciousness. The chosen one understands that challenges will still come, but they are no longer ruled by them, because now there is a foundation. There are roots. There is direction. And that inner stability changes everything. The crossing was not meant to take them to a physical place. It was meant to place them in a spiritual state where everything false loses power, and everything true blooms, even in the midst of difficulty. You are not here to please. You are here to live with purpose, and living with purpose requires coherence between faith and action, alignment between words and presence, obedience, even in silence. Reaching the end of this message doesn't mean the journey is over. For the chosen ones, it simply means that consciousness has reached a new point. Everything that has been said so far is not to create anxiety, nor to build unrealistic expectations. It is to bring clarity. Because when clarity arrives, fear loses its grip, and confusion begins to dissolve. The crossing to the fifth dimension doesn't happen suddenly or spectacularly. It is built day by day, in silent choices, in the no's you've learned to say, in the separations that hurt but were necessary. It happens when you decide to live in alignment with what you feel in your spirit, even if that sets you apart from the majority. The chosen ones are not those who know everything, nor those who live without hardship. They are those who have learned to listen to their own soul, who have understood that it's no longer possible to live divided between what they feel and what they do, who have realized that continuing to insist on the old after awakening creates a deep weariness, a weariness that isn't physical, but spiritual. The new earth, this new state of consciousness, doesn't eliminate life's challenges. What changes is the way they're faced. The chosen one no longer reacts as before, no longer gets lost in unnecessary conflicts, no longer lives trying to prove worth or seek validation. They begin to live guided by inner peace, not external pressure. This new time brings simplicity, less noise, less urgency, less need to please. In return, it brings presence, discernment, and a sense of being in the right place, even when the path seems uncertain. Security no longer comes from control, but is born from trust, in God and in the process being lived. It's important to understand. Not everyone around you will understand your transformation. Some will distance themselves. Others will try to pull you back into old versions of yourself. That's part of it. The crossing always involves separation, not out of pride, but out of alignment. Each person moves at the pace they are able to. The chosen ones feel deep in their hearts that there is no going back. Not because the past was bad, but because it has fulfilled its purpose. Everything you've lived has brought you here. The pain, the losses, the silences, the new beginnings. Nothing was wasted. Everything worked together to prepare you for this level of consciousness. The fifth dimension begins when you choose to live in truth, when you prefer peace over approval, when you honor your boundaries, when you accept that you don't need to be understood by everyone to be on the right path. That is the true sign of spiritual maturity. Now, I want to hear from you. What within you do you feel needs to be closed so that this new time can fully manifest? It could be a cycle, a behavior, a relationship, or an internal posture. Leave a simple, sincere comment related to this crossing. Your sharing may help other chosen ones who are going through.
Dispatch 668 on 148 Hillside. Receiving 140 Hillside Village.
In 1247 was a city barely holding itself together. The streets were narrow, muddy pathways where waste pooled in corners and disease spread like whispered rumors. Buildings were mostly timber and rubble, thrown up quickly and collapsing just as fast. Fire was a constant threat, and the idea of urban planning was little more than a fantasy. This was a world where survival meant getting through winter, where medicine was prayer, and where the concept of mental health didn't exist in any meaningful sense. The World Fair of 1889 is usually remembered for a single image, the Eiffel Tower rising above the city as a bold symbol of modern engineering. In textbooks and tourist narratives, the story often ends there. The tower stands alone, presented as a daring experiment that shocked the public and ultimately became a global icon. Yet this familiar version of history leaves out a crucial detail, one that becomes impossible to ignore once you examine the earliest photographs of the exposition. The Eiffel Tower did not rise from empty lawns or quiet promenades. It stood at the center of an immense architectural landscape filled with palaces, domes, arcades, towers, and exhibition halls of staggering scale and ornamentation. These buildings were not background decorations. They dominated the skyline, framed the boulevards, and surrounded the tower so completely that many contemporary visitors describe the Eiffel Tower as feeling like a spire within a much larger imperial city. What makes this contrast so striking is not simply the size of these forgotten structures, but how little they are discussed today. Despite being extensively photographed and widely visited, most of these buildings have vanished from public memory. The familiar story celebrates a single iron tower, while the broader spectacle, arguably one of the most ambitious architectural displays of the 19th century, has quietly faded into obscurity. This series begins by reopening that forgotten chapter. According to the official historical narrative, the areas surrounding the Champ de Mars, the Trocadero Hill, and the riverbanks of the Seine were largely open or lightly developed before preparations for the Paris World Fair began. The exposition, we are told, transformed these empty or underutilized spaces into a temporary city of innovation. Yet when we turn to early photographs taken during and even before the fair's opening, a different picture begins to emerge, one that feels difficult to reconcile with that simplified account. In many of these images, the exposition grounds do not resemble a construction site in progress. Instead, they appear as a fully realized urban environment. Wide boulevards stretch into the distance, lined with ornate lampposts and decorative railings. Massive facades already stand upright, complete with sculptural elements, arches, and symmetry that suggest careful long-term planning rather than rushed assembly. Stone bridges cross the river, adorned with statues and balustrades that appear stylistically mature, even weathered, rather than newly installed. This raises an uncomfortable question. How could so much monumental architecture appear so complete, so refined, and so integrated into the landscape within the narrow construction timelines typically associated with world fairs? Large-scale urban projects normally leave behind clear stages of development, foundations, scaffolding, partially finished structures. Yet many photographs show finished streetscapes without visible signs of hurried or provisional work. Some historians argue that photography can be misleading, capturing only select angles or moments after completion. That explanation may account for individual images, but it becomes harder to accept when dozens of photographs from different viewpoints show the same level of completeness. The consistency suggests that at least portions of the environment were already in place before the fair reached its final stages. What deepens the mystery is the architectural style itself. Many buildings surrounding the fairgrounds appear to draw from classical, Renaissance, Byzantine, and eclectic traditions that feel older than the late 19th century. Their proportions, ornamentation, and urban alignment resemble permanent civic architecture rather than structures designed for a short exhibition season. This does not automatically imply an unknown civilization or lost technology, but it does challenge the idea that everything visible was created rapidly and exclusively for the 1889 event. Contemporary maps and planning documents often describe large-scale redevelopment, yet photographic evidence sometimes appears ahead of those timelines. This discrepancy has led some researchers to question whether the exposition was entirely a construction project or partly an unveiling and repurposing of existing urban elements. Importantly, this remains a question, not a conclusion. Documentation from the period is incomplete, and photography alone cannot provide definitive answers. Still, the visual record forces us to pause. The Paris of the World Fair looks less like a temporary exhibition site and more like a city already confident in its monumental form. Whether this impression is the result of rapid industrial capability, selective documentation, or something not yet fully understood, it introduces a tension between what we are told and what we can clearly see. And it is within that tension that the deeper mystery begins to take shape. World fairs have long been associated with temporary architecture, structures built for a season and dismantled soon after. The official accounts of the 1889 Paris World Fair follow this narrative closely. Palaces, exhibition halls, and ornate facades are described as provisional, constructed quickly with lightweight materials, intended to impress for a few months before being removed. Yet, when we examine the surviving photographs and contemporary accounts, a stark contradiction emerges. Many of the exposition buildings appear permanent, even monumental. Stonework is prevalent, facades are covered with intricate carvings, statues, and decorative motifs that would require months of skilled craftsmanship. The use of iron and glass is extensive, forming soaring arches, vaulted ceilings, and structural elements far beyond what one would expect from a temporary fairground fall. In some cases, foundations are visible, clearly designed to bear enormous weight, and staircases are wide and robust, suggesting longevity rather than a fleeting installation. Visitors of the time frequently remarked on the solidity and grandeur of these buildings. Journals and newspaper reports describe structures that felt ancient, imperial, or cathedral-like. The Eiffel Tower itself, a marvel, was surrounded not by lawns and minor pavilions, but by vast palaces and halls that dominated the skyline. Many contemporaries expressed awe at the architectural scale, yet historians today refer to these buildings as fleeting, ephemeral constructions, a contradiction that cannot be ignored. The paradox deepens when we consider the construction timelines. Buildings described as temporary were reportedly completed within months, sometimes just a year or two. Yet the scale, materials, and detailing seen in the photographs suggest a level of labor and precision that would challenge even modern engineers. Cast iron arches, vaulted glass ceilings, and stone carvings do not appear to have been mass produced. They seem bespoke, carefully assembled, and painstakingly designed. Another oddity lies in the official documentation. Many plans, blueprints, and construction records are incomplete or missing entirely. While some argue that this is simply the result of bureaucratic oversight, it adds to the sense that something about these structures does not fit the usual World Fair narrative. How could such grand architecture vanish almost entirely within decades, leaving minimal trace or record, yet be described as temporary without any controversy at the time? The tension between appearance and official description raises fundamental questions about what temporary truly meant at the 1889 exposition. Were these structures genuinely intended to be short-lived, or was the label applied retroactively to simplify their removal from historical memory? Regardless of interpretation, the photographs leave little room for doubt. These were buildings designed with permanence in mind, contradicting the narrative of rapid, disposable construction. They remain one of the most striking mysteries of the Paris World Fair, evidence of human achievement that appears too advanced, too finished, and too monumental to fit neatly within the official story. When we think of world fairs, we imagine grand halls filled with the latest inventions, steam engines, textile machinery, and experimental devices showcased for curious visitors. Yet the buildings that housed these marvels at the 1889 Paris World Fair often resembled something entirely different: ancient cathedrals, imperial palaces, or monumental civic complexes. The contrast between function and form is striking, and it forces us to question how we interpret the architectural record of the fair. Take the Palace of Industry, for example. Officially described as a showcase for machinery, textiles, and industrial progress, the building's design communicates far more than utility. Its soaring iron and glass vaults, intricate stone facades, colossal archways, and symmetrical layouts evoke the solemnity of a cathedral or the grandeur of a royal court. Visitors at the time often compared walking inside to entering a temple, noting the echoing interiors, the filtered sunlight pouring through vast skylights, and the overwhelming sense of scale. It was a structure that inspired awe, not simply efficiency. Similarly, other exposition halls and palaces displayed architectural details typically associated with long-standing traditions: ornate domes, stacked decorative elements, sculpted friezes, and elaborate geometric motifs. Many of these design elements resemble what some researchers have dubbed Tartarian characteristics. Though the term itself is theoretical, the visual evidence is clear. These structures are complex, monumental, and strikingly symmetrical. They seem almost timeless, echoing centuries of architectural knowledge rather than the rapid construction techniques of the late 1800s. The interiors reinforce this perception. Open halls span the length of entire city blocks, with cast iron arches folding into one another with mathematical precision. Ceilings rise tens of meters above the floor, and decorative features suggest a reverence for design and symbolism that exceeds the purely functional needs of an industrial exhibit. From vaulted corridors to massive staircases, every aspect of the buildings conveys permanence, intention, and sophistication. Even the smaller structures on the fairgrounds adopt this language. Kiosks, pavilions, and temporary marketplaces were often designed with miniature versions of imperial motifs: onion domes, pointed arches, arcades, and statuary that evoke distant eras. The visual consistency across the fairgrounds gives the impression of a cohesive monumental city, one that existed independently of the industrial displays it was meant to frame. This aesthetic mismatch raises questions. Why would architects invest so heavily in ancient-looking ornamentation for structures intended to be temporary and practical? Was it merely an artistic flourish, or does it hint at a deeper continuity in architectural knowledge, techniques, styles, and engineering methods that may have predated the 19th century? The contrast between industrial function and monumental form makes the Paris World Fair of 1889 not just an exposition of progress, but also a showcase of architectural mastery that appears almost timeless. By examining these ancient-like qualities, we begin to see the fair not as a fleeting celebration of industry, but as a carefully staged environment, one in which even temporary structures carry the weight and dignity of history itself. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the 1889 Paris World Fair is not the scale or beauty of the buildings, but the way so many of them vanished. In most cases, when massive structures are removed, remnants remain. Foundations, fragments of stonework, reused materials, or at the very least, commemorative plaques. Yet, for a remarkable number of exposition halls, palaces, and monumental facades, the traces are almost entirely gone. It's as if the city itself decided to forget these architectural marvels ever existed. Take the Palace of Industry as a striking example. Once one of the largest and most photographed structures on the fairgrounds, it dominated the skyline and filled visitors with awe. Yet today, not a single large-scale remnant remains. Foundations were reportedly dismantled, ironwork removed, and stone repurposed, but the historical record is frustratingly thin. There are no visible ruins, no preserved interiors, and almost no contemporary markers acknowledging its former presence. It existed, was documented, and then seemingly evaporated from the collective memory. The Trocadero Palace shows a similar pattern. Originally built for the 1878 exposition and reused in later fairs, its towering minaret-like spires, grand vaulted halls, and ornate arcades appear in hundreds of photographs. Yet today, the building is largely unrecognizable, replaced by simpler, flatter structures that bear little resemblance to the original. The removal was complete, leaving few records of the architectural ingenuity that once defined it. Contemporary accounts acknowledge the grandeur, but the modern visitor encounters only hints of what once stood. Even smaller exhibition halls, kiosks, and decorative pavilions vanished with almost equal thoroughness. Newspaper accounts, sketches, and photographs remain, yet the physical evidence is almost entirely absent. This contrasts sharply with the Eiffel Tower, which, despite initial controversy, was preserved and became a lasting symbol of the fair. Why were these other monumental buildings treated differently? Why did some structures survive while others were meticulously erased? The phenomenon extends beyond Paris. Across the world, photographs from late 19th century expositions show massive halls and palaces with incredible design and craftsmanship, many of which were dismantled or disappeared within decades. While urban redevelopment, fashion, or space considerations may account for some losses, the speed and completeness of the erasure in Paris raise intriguing questions. In certain cases, the removal appears almost intentional, as if the city sought to simplify its visual and historical narrative. This vanishing act creates a paradox. The photographs, journals, and postcards confirm these structures existed, yet modern visitors cannot experience them firsthand. Their absence challenges conventional expectations about how monumental architecture behaves over time. Typically, grand structures leave enduring evidence, whether in ruins, models, or historical acknowledgement. In the case of the Paris World Fair, the missing architecture invites speculation about construction techniques, historical documentation, and cultural choices that allowed such buildings to disappear almost without a trace. Understanding this disappearance is crucial to appreciating the deeper mystery of the exposition. It is not merely a story of temporary buildings, it is a tale of monumental design, extensive craftsmanship, and sudden erasure. A combination that continues to fascinate historians, architects, and anyone who studies the earliest photographs of Paris in 1889. The question lingers: what else has been erased, and why? The Palace of Industry stands as one of the most perplexing and awe-inspiring structures of the Paris World Fair. Constructed for the 1855 exposition, it was officially intended as a showcase for the industrial achievements of France, machinery, textiles, and emerging technologies. Yet photographs and contemporary accounts suggest a building that transcended practical function, taking on the scale, complexity, and visual language of a monumental cathedral or imperial palace. From the outside, the Palace of Industry is immediately striking. Its central nave stretches endlessly, flanked by soaring cast iron arches that fold into one another with precise symmetry. Stone facades are covered in intricate carvings, symbolic motifs, and sculpted statues, each crafted with astonishing detail. Visitors often described feeling dwarfed by the building, comparing the sensation to standing within a temple or cathedral rather than an exhibition hall. Even the ceilings, made of glass and iron, seem impossibly vast, letting in light in a way that transforms the interior into a glowing, almost spiritual space. Inside, the palace continues to defy expectations. Hallways and galleries unfold with geometric precision, creating an interior rhythm that feels more like a sacred space than a trade display. The scale is overwhelming. Staircases wide enough to accommodate large crowds, halls that could host thousands, and structural elements that modern engineers still find impressive. The sheer ambition of the design suggests careful planning over decades rather than a hurried 2-year construction schedule. Yet the most puzzling aspects are not purely architectural. Contemporary descriptions hint at subterranean spaces beneath the building, corridors and vaults whose purposes are unclear. Some photographs show crowds gathered around excavated pits near the foundations, implying either preparatory work or previously existing structures incorporated into the palace. This has led some researchers to propose that the building may have been repurposed from an earlier construction, an existing edifice adapted to the exposition's needs, though definitive evidence remains elusive. Official records claim the palace was constructed with 20,000 tons of iron and extensive stonework, yet the craftsmanship appears far more advanced than what one would expect from mid-19th century techniques. Cast iron joints align with almost mathematical precision, and decorative details rival centuries-old monuments. The narrative of a temporary industrial hall seems inadequate when confronted with these features, raising questions about the timeline, labor, and resources involved. The palace's disappearance further fuels the mystery. By the time of the 1900 exposition, it was dismantled, replaced by the Grand Palais, a structure that echoes some of its design principles but lacks its monumental complexity. Unlike the Eiffel Tower, which became an enduring symbol, the Palace of Industry faded from public consciousness, leaving behind photographs, drawings, and scattered references. No plaques commemorate its presence, and few modern visitors are aware it ever existed at all. The Palace of Industry challenges conventional understanding of 19th century architecture. It is a building that appears too massive, too detailed, and too cathedral-like to fit neatly into the historical narrative of a rapidly industrializing Paris. Its existence and erasure invite a re-evaluation of what the fair truly represented: a temporary exhibition or a fleeting glimpse of a monumental architectural reality now lost to time. One of the most confounding aspects of the Paris World Fair is how quickly its monumental buildings supposedly rose from the ground. Official narratives claim that palaces like the Palace of Industry, the Trocadero, and other enormous exhibition halls were designed, constructed, and finished within remarkably short periods, sometimes as little as 1 or 2 years. Yet when we examine the surviving photographs, visitor accounts, and structural evidence, a deeper tension emerges. The speed of construction appears almost impossible given the complexity of the buildings. The Palace of Industry, for instance, was officially built between 1853 and 1855, Contemporary accounts describe a workforce operating with hand tools, basic scaffolding, horse-powered cranes, and early steam-driven equipment. Even by today's standards, raising a building with vaulted glass ceilings spanning city block-length halls, cast iron arches of perfect symmetry, and intricately carved stone facades within such a short time frame would challenge modern engineers. Yet historical records assert it was accomplished on schedule and within budget. Structural analysis from photographs shows features that defy simple construction logic. Iron ribs align with extraordinary precision. Glass panels form vast vaulted ceilings without apparent structural compromise, and decorative elements, statues, friezes, geometric motifs are uniformly executed on a monumental scale. There is no evidence of rushed workmanship. Rather, the detailing suggests careful, deliberate craft. Hundreds of workers would have been required, yet the records rarely mention the full scope of labor involved, creating a gap between the technical demands and the documented means. The Trocadero Palace presents a similar puzzle. Built for the 1878 exposition and later reused in 1889, the twin minaret-like towers, vaulted halls, and sprawling arcades appear in photographs as if they had been standing for decades. Visitors describe them as ancient-looking, almost pre-existing rather than hastily constructed. The sheer scale and ornamentation strain credulity if one accepts the timeline of rapid construction. Some historians attribute this apparent impossibility to extraordinary industrial efficiency or centralized coordination, emphasizing that 19th century Paris had access to new materials, skilled labor, and emerging technologies. Yet, even with these advantages, aligning structural iron, glass vaults, and elaborate stonework on such massive scales would require not just manpower, but advanced planning, precision engineering, and prefabrication techniques that were not widely acknowledged for the period. The result is a paradox. The buildings exist, appear meticulously constructed, yet the official timeline leaves little room for their complexity. Temporary or permanent, industrial or cathedral-like, these structures challenge assumptions about what was achievable in the mid to late 1800s. The technical improbabilities force a re-evaluation not only of construction methods, but the broader narrative surrounding the Paris World Fair. Were these buildings truly constructed from scratch in short order, or were parts repurposed, pre-existing, or otherwise sourced in ways that remain undocumented? Whatever the explanation, the tension between timelines and structural reality remains one of the most compelling mysteries of the exposition. It's a story of human ambition that appears too advanced, too precise, and too monumental for the official history, leaving us to wonder whether we are glimpsing only a fraction of what Paris once displayed and what the historical record may have quietly erased. Buildings leave marks. They leave foundations, blueprints, photographs, or at least stories passed down through memory. Yet at the 1889 Paris World Fair, many monumental structures seem to have vanished almost entirely, erased from the collective architectural memory. The Palace of Industry, the Trocadero, and the Palace of Electricity are prime examples, structures that dominated the skyline, documented extensively in photographs and visitor accounts, yet today are almost entirely forgotten. How does a city erase such grandeur? The erasure begins subtly. As decades pass, newspapers and journals shift focus to newer events. Photographs stop circulating or are relegated to technical archives rather than public display. Scholars and guidebooks writing in the early 20th century treat these buildings as temporary or ephemeral, despite overwhelming visual evidence to the contrary. By redefining them as short-lived, history minimizes their significance, effectively rewriting public perception. Physical removal follows a similar pattern. The Palace of Industry, dismantled to make way for the Grand Palace, left almost no traces. The Trocadero's twin towers were flattened, ornate arcades replaced by simpler facades, and decorative domes disappeared. In many cases, the materials, stone, iron, and wood, were repurposed, scattered, or simply discarded. Unlike the Eiffel Tower, preserved and celebrated, these other structures were quietly removed, as if their erasure were part of a deliberate cultural decision. This disappearance is not just physical, but symbolic. The architectural language of these buildings, monumental scale, symmetry, ornate detailing, challenged contemporary notions of what industrial era architecture should look like. By erasing them, history presented a simplified narrative. Paris modernized rapidly, the World Fair celebrated progress, and these extravagant structures were minor, fleeting curiosities. In reality, the buildings suggest something more complex, a level of design, craftsmanship, and perhaps inherited knowledge that does not fit neatly into the conventional timeline of 19th century innovation. The pattern extends beyond Paris. Across Europe and the Americas, photographs from various expositions reveal structures of similar scale and detail that were dismantled or modified beyond recognition. These vanishings create a sense of discontinuity, a historical void where grandeur once stood. Scholars, engineers, and historians studying old images often express disbelief at the scale and permanence suggested by these buildings, only to confront a near total absence of physical evidence today. In examining the disappearance of architectural memory, one cannot ignore the role of perception. Labeling buildings as temporary or stylistically outdated transforms them into something expendable, justifying their removal without public debate. Over time, repetition of this narrative cements the impression that the structures never truly mattered, even when visual and textual evidence proves otherwise. The 1889 Paris World Fair thus becomes a case study in lost memory. Monumental buildings were erected, documented, admired, and then largely forgotten. Foundations, plans, and decorative details were removed, misclassified, or left unrecorded. What remains are photographs and fragments of stories, enigmatic reminders of a Paris that once existed, both fantastical and real, now almost entirely absent from the cityscape and collective memory. Amid the glimmering marvels of the 1889 Paris World Fair, the Palace of Electricity stood apart. While most exhibition halls celebrated industrial progress in machinery and textiles, this building radiated a different ambition, a monument to